is swimming strategy, the very first one, S2.1, accessible communications. And our goal here was really just trying to make sure that all of you are aware and just have some knowledge of accessibility and how it can relate to outreach materials, particularly web-based materials. But our only requirement is that someone for each SWIMMY attends this training or another training if you want to let us know of something else that you found. But mostly, I'm just going to give it over to Stephanie Bracken. So she works at the agency level, so at the Agency of Natural Resources, that first we are part of, and she's our communications director, and she has worked in accessibility for so many years. So she is a wealth of knowledge, and we are just so appreciative of her taking her time to share that with all of you. And there'll be time for questions at the end. And then if you have more like SWIP related questions, then you can reach out to me or Shannon or Chris or Anne later. But for now, Stephanie, thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me. And thanks to all of the folks here on the call today. I really appreciate it. As Alyssa mentioned, my name is Stephanie Bracken. I'm the A&R Communications Director. I'm also sort of the project point lead for all things digital accessibility. So I'm going to first start sharing my screen. I have a presentation. Alyssa and Shannon are kind enough to watch the chat. So if you have a pressing question, feel free to drop it in the chat. I'm happy to answer questions as we move through. So let's get started. All right. So digital accessibility is really the practice of ensuring there's no barriers for the public to reach our information online. I think of it as sort of for the physical spaces, we think about curb cuts for people on sidewalks. We think about Braille at elevators. We think about wheelchair ramps at our town halls. This is basically the curb cut to make sure people are able to get onto our website. So if you're visually impaired, you're hearing impaired, or have another disability of some sort, digital accessibility makes sure that people in the public can get our information. So why is this important? Well, part of the reason it's important because 25% of all Vermonters, that's 1 in 4 people in Vermont, have a recognized disability. That is recognized, meaning recognized by the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. However, digital accessibility benefits everyone, not just those with a recognized disability. When you have good accessible design, it helps individuals with temporary or situational disabilities. Let's be honest, I'm getting older. I'm having a harder and harder time seeing things on my computer screen. If there's low contrast, I'm constantly squinting and like adjusting my glasses. So when you have good web design, you have good document design, it helps anybody be able to, including somebody like myself, access the information a little bit more easily. So the other why is, well, why do we have to do it? Who's telling us we have to do it? There's actually 2 laws, federal laws. The first one is Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It basically mandates that all federal agencies and any organization that is receiving federal funds. So if you think about it, the Agency of Natural Resources, Environmental Conservation, we receive federal funds, and then those funds flow out to schools, to towns to help support their wastewater systems, to other programs. So if your town is receiving that federal money, technically this law applies to you. But the other big law that really sort of governs what we're doing here, digital accessibility, is the American with Disabilities Act. Initially, it really only applied to like physical spaces, jobs, education opportunities, but most recently, the ADA has been expanded by a new rule. And you can see very clearly in the title there, it says state and local governments. So that means all of you on this call, that you are a local government or entity. And so this new rule applies to all of your digital spaces. Like I said in the beginning, Digital accessibility is basically the curb cut or ramp into your website to make sure people can access it. This new rule says you are now required by as of April 2026, so April of this year, which is literally right around the corner, means that your materials, your website are supposed to meet these very specific, they're called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, some people call it WCAG, but these are the standards that tell you how to build a website, create documents that live online so they're accessible to people. So the guidelines, web content accessibility guidelines, again, are the technical standards. So if you think about a website, you've got your platform itself. So the website itself, that has all the programming behind the scenes. And then you have the content, the things that you put into it. You put in the text, you add photos, maybe you have a document that's like a flyer to tell people how to recycle. That's the content. So the programming in the back and the text, images, and sounds you put in, both of those need to be compliant with these new guidelines. So the goal of these guidelines is that they're perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivable just means that the information is visible and accessible to so people can see and hear them. Operable just means like as you're tabbing through, like most of your off screens, I won't make you raise your hand, but I love using my mouse. Some people like using the like mouse pad on their computer, and some people like using the arrow buttons to tab through things. So when it says operable, it means no matter how I want to interact with your website, all of those options need to work, whether it's a touch screen or some other kind of mechanism. It needs to work no matter what you're using. Understandable basically means that the information cannot be so complex that you cannot use it. Now, I love my friends at the Department of Environmental Conservation, but many of them are really smart scientists and they love writing at like the graduate school level. And it takes me forever to read what they're writing because I'm not educated in that way. So I have to like look things up. But if your information is so complex that, somebody in high school can't read your information, you may want to like write in more plain language. So that's part of the goal, is making sure the information you're sharing, your audience, your public, your customers can actually read it and understand it, so then they can comply with whatever you need them to do. And the last part of this group of sort of pillars, so to speak, is robust. And what that means is that as technology changes, like you always have to update your web browser. You get a new phone and you have to do another upgrade overnight while you're sleeping. It means that as technology changes, your website is still you still can use it on old versions and new versions. So again, that's like one of those behind the scenes programmer things, but it's good to know that that's kind of like the pillar of these guidelines that we're trying to achieve. So before I kind of move on, does anybody have questions? You can put it in the chat or raise your hand. I'm happy to answer anything before I get into kind of the like literally what this means, like what would I have to do? Okay, I'm just curious, by a show of hands, how many of you on the call are familiar with or actually access or edit your website for your program? Okay, we got a couple. Great. Nice. All right. Okay, good. So for those of you that manage your website, that's great. For those of you who may create documents that go onto the website, this is really important to know. For those of you who maybe don't have anything to do with your websites, this is still good background information, and I highly recommend you take this presentation video. We'll share the slides. I'm actually going to share a tip sheet. I forgot to tell Alyssa that, but I made y'all a tip sheet to give you some guidelines. I recommend you share this with your leadership team, your management team, to make sure you get this information to whoever is managing your website. It could be somebody at your town office. It could be a contractor. All right, somebody has a question. Let's see. All right. So great question. The question is are the WCAG guide standards derived from ADA guidelines or were they created by Vermont policies? I did not mention this already. But so the answer is the web content accessibility guidelines were created ages ago, and they were actually created by the people who like created the internet. These are guidelines that they set, these ideas, programming standards, so your website will work the same no matter which browser you're on. So somebody a long time ago created these standards to make sure websites operated correctly. It is basically it's the standards that everybody uses across the world. Like it's not Vermont specific, it's not the United States specific, it is a global standard that we all use. The ADA is said that's the gold standard of web management or web guidelines, and that's what we're going to use. Great question.
And it
Any
looks
other?
like Mel has a question as well, if you want to come off mute, Mel. Or maybe not.
Maybe it was from when we all raised our hands before.
Yeah, sorry, that was from raising my hand.
Sorry, got it. Well, thank you for managing your website.
Yes, exactly. Thank you thanks to all those that manage your websites, because I know what a challenging job it can be. All right, so let's start really getting into what this means, because most people are like, okay, you're talking all this stuff about the law and these random guidelines. This next part is really going to be like walking through the things you need to think about when creating documents or managing the content on your website. As I said, there's the stuff behind the scene, the platform, all the programming. Most of us don't have access to that. I work for the state. I have a vendor that does all the back end programming. So as a state, as we're working through it, I call our company and I'm like, hey, this doesn't pass accessibility. It is their job to fix the back end. I suspect some of you, maybe a lot of you, will have content, the things we put in it. So social media, documents, flyers, all of that stuff, you will probably and more than likely have control over. All right. So what I've done here is we're going to go through a series of slides, and there'll be the title of what it is, and then there'll be a number. 1.1.1. That is actually the guideline in the web content accessibility standards. So I've tried to tie every principle or concept to actually where it lives in the web content accessibility guidelines. These aren't just, for a long time, people I think thought I was just making this stuff up, that it wasn't based in reality. So I wanted to tie the actual guidelines to the concept. So the first concept, or the first principle, so to speak, is anytime you add an image to your website, you add it to a document that ends up on your website, you need to have alternative text, something short and concise. Here's the reason why. You get somebody who is visually impaired, they may have a screen reader and it'll read all the words, but when it comes to a picture, it can't read it because there's no words there for it. So your job is to create the words that the reader can read. So it should describe the image. So in this case, these are bales of recyclable materials in a warehouse next to a skid steer loader, right? But something clear and concise that the screen reader can read, so the user, your web visitor, will know what that picture is supposed to depict. So that's the first one. I think that's one of the easiest ones for people to understand. So the next one is captions. So I'm going to play this. It's not, you might be able to. Oh. So well, the point was I was supposed to be able to see the closed captioning. So in this case, there's a video The goal is if you have videos embedded on your website, or if you have your own YouTube channel, we have a YouTube channel, you are required to have captioning or that closed captioning at the bottom of your videos. The nice thing is if you happen to use YouTube, there is a system that will actually automatically add closed captioning. It's not perfect, but it does meet the requirement of 1.2.2. So captioning is required for all videos. Okay, tables. I'm not sure how often you would use tables. I know at the Agency of Natural Resources, we always have tables chocked full of content. They're often really complex, but your tables need to be as simple as possible and structured in a way that a screen reader can read it. Like when we are looking at it, we can kind of like say, okay, this is this row and that column. If set up correctly, a table can be read by a screen reader or other assistive technologies. Generally use tables for data only. Make sure the title is outside and not inside the table. Identifying header rows. Again, this is a lot of in a document. So if you use the standard insert table in a Word document, you should be usually in pretty good shape. So this is an example of what not to do with your tables. It's very complex. It's got bright colors. There are merged fields. This would never pass an accessibility check or a digital accessibility check. So simplicity is sort of the rule of the day when it comes to tables. So another example of tables. There's a description at the top. There's a header row that defines what each column is, and then the information and content should be fairly clear and simple. All right. The next principle is blank spaces. So I know when growing up, when I was in 5th grade and I took my typing class, you're always supposed to double space after a period. That is not usually generally like accepted anymore, and they want you to have a single space. It also applies to if you want extra space between paragraphs, instead of hitting return a bunch of times, a screen reader would hit all of those and basically read out loud blank space, blank space, blank space. Instead, you can change the spacing using styles in Microsoft Word. So again, less extra spaces. Okay, colors to convey information. So I've noticed sometimes on flyers, it'll be like putting something in the trash and it'll have a big red X over it. And then putting something in the recycling bin, it'll have like a green check next to it. Now the check and the X are fine, but if you only use like maybe encase them in green and red only to kind of depict good or bad or yes or no. If you only use color to depict meaning, it'll be very challenging for somebody who is colorblind. As you can see, how colors look different depending on the type of color blindness you may have. So you can use color, it just can't be the only thing you use to define the meaning of something. Color contrast. This is one that particularly gets me. Again, my vision is not what it used to be. So the perfect standard is having the highest contrast as possible. That would be black text on white background or white text on a black background. That's the highest contrast you can get. That is generally the preferred thing. But when you sort of get to these other scales, you can see like light gray on slightly darker gray is almost impossible to read. Even the sort of pink on green is not great. The pink on that blue is terrible. I don't even think I could read it from here. So color contrast is something that's really important, not just with text, but also color contrast if you're ever doing any kind of graphic design. So again, you're making a flyer that you want to upload to your website. If you're putting like fonts on top of like photographs or fonts on top of colored backgrounds, you need to make sure there's enough contrast there to make sure it's readable. And there are tools that can help you with that. On the tip sheet that I'm going to share, there's a tool called Web Aim contrast checker, and it'll let you plug in the color codes or the hex codes for your foreground and background colors, and it'll tell you if it actually passes accessibility. So just another principle here, and good all-around design if you have really good color contrast. This one gets a lot of our folks at the agency about using wrapped text. Wrapped text can be really challenging for visual readers. So the preferred is making sure if you're using images, whether it's on the website itself or in a document, that you use in line with text. So the visual reader will read the content, see the image, and then keep reading content. When you wrap it around, it doesn't know when to read in the picture. It's like it doesn't know how it belongs. It may read it in the middle of a sentence and then it's out of context and doesn't make sense. All right. There we go. Text spacing, again, it's a visual thing. Generally, if you're creating a Word document, you're editing a website, just use the default setting for the spacing. It basically like how you crowd your letters together. The first paragraph is normal spacing, but that second paragraph, you can see that I've squished the font together, and it's a lot harder to read. So again, this is a requirement for the web content accessibility guidelines, trying to make sure that things are easier to read. Again, for people with disabilities or people who just may have other situational disabilities. All right, hyperlinks. This is the most common one that I get. This is probably the most common mistake or error I see. So an inline link is basically you highlight words and then you make those words into a link. So it turns blue, has the underline, it's a hyperlink. People who use screen readers, if you get to a link, like the bottom one, that's the full URL, that screen reader will read every single letter and character. So it'll read HTTPS://A-N-R dot, and it'll just read the whole thing out. So for the end user, it's going to be really challenging for them to know. They'd have to like try to write it down, but if you're visually impaired, that might be a problem for you. So it's really good to use an inline link. So in this case, this is a web page for climate change. I would write the word climate change, highlight it, and then make it into a link that goes to that location. That link, that inline link, should be really descriptive. So when that person reaches that link, they know what it's going to. They know what it's going to be. It's going to be a flyer for recycling. That's your inline link. A report on watershed management. That would be the word you use. If you use things like click here, learn more, people aren't going to know what they're clicking on. There's a really neat feature in these visual readers, especially where the user can select read me all the hyperlinks. So if they did that and all you used was click here, it would literally read through click here, click here, click here, click here, and they wouldn't know what they were clicking, so they'd have to go back and read. Let's see, I have a question. Doesn't the description before the link give? Well, yeah, in theory, the description before the link should let them know, but if they're using that feature where they're just asking to read the links, it doesn't provide that extra context. So it's really good to really just use the inline link as part of your sentence, so it can be read in context or out of context.
So
Yeah.
I think this makes this difficult, and I think it makes it redundant. So like when we're putting out information, like say in a newsletter or even on the website, some of these links are extremely long.
Right. So, but you wouldn't see the link itself. You would just see the words.
Okay.
So you would say maybe it's a report on recycling. So you type out your sentence. You're like, um, learn more or like check out our report on recycling. So that's the full sentence. Check out the report on recycling. The words report on recycling, you would highlight them and turn that into a link. And that's all you would see. You wouldn't
Okay.
see that like big, long, like 100 characters. You just see the inline link. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got it. And that
Okay,
is,
cool.
yeah, I got it. Thanks for.
You're welcome. I appreciate you asking. I'd rather somebody ask than not ask. So they make sense. But again, so the link text is that yes. Elise, that is correct. The link text is the descriptive link. Exactly. Um, see. Well, we can get to more examples if we have more questions. But also back to the other point is if the description can't just be like click here or learn more because people will get lost. They won't know. And they like if they're just reading the links themselves and not the full context, it would be difficult. All right. Headings. For those of you, most cases, both web editors and Microsoft Word have built-in headings. They're styles or some kind of headings, and it's heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, so on and so forth. And it's kind of like building an outline like you did in school. It's like 1, and then it's like sub A, B, back out to 2, and then A, B under 2, and then maybe you have like another level. The idea is that you need to use these headings in a nested way. So you can't ever start with heading 3 and then go to heading 1. It has to be like heading 1, 2. You can go back to 1 and 2 again, add a 3, go back to 1. So it all needs to be in a very like an ordered way. Again, the reason for this is people with a screen reader, there's a section that they can select that says, just read me the headings. But the system is designed to read the headings in order. So it'll go to heading 1, but if you've used heading 3 first, it'll skip over it. It won't be able to read it. So it's really important to kind of make sure you're using these programmed headings. Great. That's a great question, Elise. For those of you who haven't seen it in the chat, Elise is asking about PDFs or older documents that don't meet these criteria. At the end, I have a list of all of these resources. The state of Vermont has created kind of like sort of like checklist of which documents you need to go back and what we call remediate or fix to make compliant versus move like ones you don't have to. I have been through this particular question applies to meeting minutes, and I know y'all have lots of meeting minutes. In my opinion, anything that's older, things like meeting minutes, we consider, so they'd be digital, it's like a PDF, it's before the deadline, and it's for reference only. So somebody doesn't rely on that information to like apply for a service. It would be considered a reference document, and it would be an exception to accessibility. You would not have to make it, or you would not have to remediate literally hundreds and hundreds of meeting minutes and agendas and all of the things that come with public meetings that we're all painfully aware of. Yeah, I agree, Elise. It does feel like a little bit of a nightmare thinking about having to go backwards and fixing all of those documents. But the state does have some, I think, very helpful guidelines about walking through determining what I have to remediate and what I don't have to remediate. Okay, the next one is plain language. Plain language, I think we kind of touched on this before, really write to your audience level. If you are writing like a white paper for a college student, great, write it at the college level. But if you're writing it, for those of you who may not know, the average reading level for people in the United States is the 5th grade reading level. This is adult US citizens, the average reading level is the 5th grade reading level. So keep that in mind when you're developing things. Make it simple as possible. use bullets to kind of highlight the concepts, use smaller words, omit unnecessary words. As government entities, right? Like, we don't need to have all the extra flourishes. We just need to get to the point and keep it simple so people can actually like receive and understand the information. There are also tools. I'm not sure I have it in this list, but there are a couple tools. One is called the Hemingway app. You can copy and paste your content in there, and it'll rate what reading level it is. So you can kind of get a gauge. When I copy my stuff in there and it's like level 13, which is like college level, I'm like, ooh, I got to rewrite some of this and make it a little simpler. And so it's a great tool. There's some links at the end for that. There are some other recommendations. Now, these are not officially part of the web content accessibility guidelines, but these are highly recommended, is keeping your font super simple. You don't want like super flourishy things or handwritten, like it looks like handwriting. At the state of Vermont, Arial font is our standard font. But basically things that are what we call sans serif, like the ones that are all straight, none of the ones that have hooks at the end. Those serif ones can be really hard for people who may have like dyslexia or other reading disabilities, for them to be able to comprehend. Yeah, great question, Dustin. Real quick, we're going to go back to things like plain language. I agree that there are going to be times that plain language just isn't possible, right? Like, your lawyers have gotten involved. You have a very, very specific non-discrimination notice. Maybe it's like a other kind of legal notice. Sometimes we can't avoid that complexity. So in those cases, do what your lawyer tells you. Use the official legal guidance. I will say plain language is a little bit of like a sliding scale, right? Like, there's no like on or off switch. It's plain, it's not plain. So we're going to have to use our best judgment in cases like this, Dustin, in terms of like, this is required versus, hey, I have some flexibility in how I explain compliance, or how I explain to recycle, or how I explain my fee structures. I think we can use some flexibility in that space. All right, great. So this other recommendation is emphasis text. Have any of you ever gotten like an email and it's like bolded and italicized and then it's all caps, and like somebody's trying to make you see all of the super important things all at the same time? And then you're like, which part is important? So emphasis text is something that can be really distracting. Again, people who may have some kind of reading disability, dyslexia. I personally, all caps drives me crazy. It feels like somebody's shouting at me, which never feels fun. So emphasis text is, we highly encourage people to use it minimally. Like, if you have a one-page document, maybe use a bold once or twice. It shouldn't be like every sentence or a couple times in a paragraph. Sparingly is better. Less is more in this case for emphasis text. So again, we talked about applicability. Again, so that was the main guidelines. Okay, that is not all of the guidelines. So the last one I did was plain language, which was 3.1. There are tons of guidelines, but most of them are super technical and are for web programmers, the people who are doing all the magic in the back. A lot of that is for them. This is like the top, however many I had there, 12 or so guidelines that will really help get you moving in the right direction for your website and your documents. If you apply these sort of tips, you're going to be a lot better off than, say, you were before. And I think it's easy to get overwhelmed thinking, oh my gosh, we have to do all these things. I think one of the most important things to remember is progress is just as important. It can't be perfection. Like, to Dustin's point, there are going to be times it's going to be complex. There are going to be times like I'm not able to do a certain thing. So it's really important to know that there's a lot here, but if you really try to stick to some of these really basic things, it's really important. All right, applicability we talked about. So these are the resources that I'm sharing. There's a link actually to the rule itself. Again, we'll share this with everybody. There's a link to the web content accessibility guidelines. There is a link to the state of Vermont's website from our chief marketing office, and they have a ton of resources. They have more trainings that are open to the public to look at, like how to make a Word document accessible, how to make a PDF accessible. There's also, like I mentioned before, when you're evaluating your documents, do I need to remediate old documents or not? There's a whole like decision tree that they have available. So for those of you who are going to kind of take on this project and go on this adventure, the state's website, now a lot of it is very specific to state entities, but I think there's a lot of value in there for those that are going to be working on digital accessibility. Another resource is called WebAIM. They have a bunch of accessibility checkers that you can use, including the contrast checker that I mentioned, and then the Hemingway app I mentioned before as well, which is related to checking for plain language or really like reading level. It also highlights some other things. And the Hemingway app, there is a free version that you can use online, which is totally available to all of you. All right, I have a couple more questions. Okay, so Elisa's first question is, they have a new website. Great, I'm so glad for you. And it looks like it was built to these standards. Awesome. But the rest of the items, social media, constant contact for newsletters. So the question is accessibility managed by these third parties or by the content contributors? So I would say yes to both. So the platform itself, you may want to contact them or even dig around in constant contact. They have, I believe, Constant Contact, because we use that as well, has like a digital accessibility statement about what they do to comply with that. But again, as you're building that newsletter, you need to make sure that your images have alt text. You need to make sure that you're using the correct inline links. If you're using headings, you want to make sure your headings are nested in the right way. So again, it's very similar to your website. The platform, whether it's web-based or in another, in another place hosted, those programmers are responsible for that, but any of the content you put in is going to be your responsibility to make sure you're following those guidelines. So hopefully that helps. Looks like we have two questions from Brian. Do the scrolling banners at the top of web pages need alt text for the descriptions? And also, is there a floating logos with text? All right, so for question one, I know for my website, so the A&R website has that hero slide or the scrolling pictures, the banners. We have a place when we update those, there is a place for alt text. So yes, technically those banners things need alt text. Not knowing what platform you're using, I'm not sure how you would apply it, but in theory, yes, you would need alt text. I don't know what floating logos with text means. I don't know if you need like word wraps, like click goes over any page you click, like a logo that goes over any page you click. I'm not familiar with what that is. Okay, I'm not sure, but if you have somebody that's managing your website or like whoever has built your website, they might have a better idea. That sounds like it might be a programming question, and I'm not sure. Okay, part two of your question. Is there a recommended text reading software for us to use testing our web pages? That's a great question. I can actually look up that question. I don't know off the top of my head, but I understand there are like 2 or 3 like free softwares online that you can use to read through it. That being said, if you're looking at PDFs, PDF actually has a built-in screen reader and it'll read it out loud for you. So if you're working on a PDF, you can use that. If you're working on a website, I can look up what some of those are. I know we've talked about them, but I don't use them very often, so I can't recall off the top of my head, but I can get back to you. Great. Thank you for the questions. So that's, I mean, I know that was really fast. That's kind of the end of it. I'm going to say a couple things. I mean, clearly, like, accessibility isn't just a problem to be solved. It really is a way to kind of change our thinking to make sure we're including everybody in our work, making sure people have access to the information that we all regularly can get access to. But I would encourage you, especially those of you who are actually going to be doing this work and not just passing it along to somebody else, just take it one step at a time. Like I will say again, the state of Vermont, the CMO's website, they've laid it out for tasks we have to do. And what I'm doing is literally going through step by step. If you start thinking about everything all at once, it's going to feel very overwhelming. So I would highly recommend thinking about following the same steps that a lot of state agencies are doing, of like, get a site map for your website so you know what all the pages you have, and then like prioritize which pages. Like, don't worry about the page that somebody only clicked on once 20 years ago. Pick your home page, pick the page that has the most traffic, and kind of organize them either from what you think. Some of you may have Google Analytics, but organize those pages and then go through each page and be like, oh, does this meet accessibility? Do a visual inspection of it. There are tools out there that you, I believe, can purchase that will do, there's a company called Accessible Web. The state is paid for their service where it'll check your site to see if you have problems. You're not required to have somebody do that. You're not required to. You can do it yourself. Maybe you can work with your web vendor to help you with that. But honestly, like, again, try to take it one step at a time. Let's be honest, if you haven't started this work already, you are not going to meet the April deadline. And I would say try not to super worry about it. But for those, again, who are going to take on this project, start documenting what you're going to do. Maybe outline a plan of what how you're going to manage this issue, how you're going to come into compliance. And again, take it one step at a time, honestly, and really try to rely on the resources the state has provided. Again, it's mostly geared for state entities, but I think there's a whole lot of applicability to the work that our local municipalities are going to have to do. All right, I have a couple questions. Yeah, Dustin, that's a really good point. Dustin's kind of comment is about somebody who may be using a screen reader and that their experience may be very overwhelming. I can tell you it is. My father-in-law was visually impaired, and I watched him use a screen reader, and I was like, I don't know how he has the patience for this. It can be really challenging. So even more of a reason to really think about that user experience. I would say, in terms of how many images you have, I would be thoughtful of how many images. Maybe one that's really relevant to what you're talking about, but you don't necessarily need 5 of the same thing, right? So really, like, don't eliminate things that are helpful, but don't overwhelm it. It's like that fine balance of providing just enough information, making it visually appealing to somebody who is visually, is a sighted individual, but also not so many that you're going to overwhelm the user experience for somebody who's visually impaired.
Here, I want to step in and answer Pam's question.
Oh, yeah.
Because yes, if you are feeling overwhelmed that you haven't started thinking about any of these things and April feels really soon, like Stephanie said, like, progress is amazing. But in terms of your actual like SWIP requirements, your only requirement is that you listen to the training. So you're here, you've done it. Otherwise, yes, we hope that you'll apply this information, but that is truly on you, on a schedule that works for you. But we are here to help if you do have more questions on how to apply this information. So,
Yeah,
hope
and
that
and
helps
I
you.
yeah, I echo what Alyssa said is, I mean, your requirement for your, from DEC has been met just by showing up today. Um, but but the state in general, we don't have oversight on what you're doing. Like, we're not going to come in and check your websites. We're not going to give you audits. If anybody's going to audit you, it's going to be the federal government, right? Because they will audit me, they'll audit you. And usually these audits only happen when somebody writes in and complains. So the complaint goes to whoever, usually the Department of Justice. It'll go to their civil rights unit. They'll open an investigation, and then you and the feds will work out how to fix the problem. But we, as a state entity, do not have regulatory oversight for digital accessibility. So this is more of like, we wanted you to know about it so you can be prepared in case somebody asks, or something like that. You just have some situational knowledge that this is now like a new requirement, and it's really just hopefully providing some helpful information. Okay, let me see if I can catch up on a couple questions. Okay, we got that question. Okay, Emily asked, for some PDFs, we have a note on our website that a member of staff could read the information case. I'm not sure I understand that a member of, oh, so you're saying you have like a disclaimer on your website that's like, if you're not able to access this information or you can't read it, we'll read it to you. I mean, I think it would, I think that's a lovely service to provide. I mean, we have a disclaimer that says, if you're unable to access our information, please let us know and we will provide it to you in an alternative format. And that's what you're doing. Reading it out loud as an alternative format. So I think that's super appropriate. Again, this Chief Marketing Office, the state website has recommendations for language. You can look at the ANR website. We have web policies. You're more than welcome to mimic what we've done. We have a place where people can report problems, complaints, request information in alternative format. But I think that's a lovely service.
And I guess, Stephanie, just to add to that, so we've been certainly having a lot of conversations with Stephanie and internally thinking about our own website. And so, for example, our 802 Recycles page, where we have a PDF map of all of the swimmies, the colorful state of Vermont that is currently, it's not clickable, it's not accessible. But for someone who is sighted, like, it's very informative visually. So we have added a list of all of the contact information that's just your name, your web address, and your telephone number below the map. So we're sometimes trying to be redundant and having the same information in multiple ways as a little bit of a workaround for when we feel like, we want to have, here's this poster that you can print. Like, the only purpose of it being on our website is so someone can download it and print it. It's not actually providing information in and of itself. So it's definitely a work in progress. And like I said, we're happy to talk with you about like specific instances, and especially Shannon has really been trying to creatively work around all of the challenges on our own website.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Just to kind of add to what Alyssa says is, often when I'm talking to our staff members about like, this isn't accessible, but I don't want to like make it more difficult for other people. I have this scale. It's like good, better, best. Now we have like, there's the gold standard of like, we want it all to meet accessibility perfectly. But one, we don't want to then make it harder for somebody else, right? So sometimes we have to come up with creative solutions. So in this case, we have a map for somebody who's sighted, and then we have a list of contents that somebody can read with a visual reader. So sometimes you may have to do two things. Sometimes you may just have to be creative in other ways, but we always try to get the gold standard, but sometimes we might have to compromise and leave something in place that may not meet accessibility, but we provide other opportunities for people to interact with the information. Okay, one more question from Brian. Would it be discriminatory to have a link allowing a person to switch from visually impaired prioritized web pages from the official homepage. I don't know. I think that's a great question for a lawyer. I have seen something similar for, like the EPA has a button where they can switch from the English version to the Spanish version of their website. So I don't necessarily think it's discriminatory. I would say though that you're then making twice as much work for yourself. So, just something to consider. Um, like I have I have 123 web pages, so I'm more than likely not gonna do that. DEC, I don't even know how many web pages they have because it is a crazy large website. So, but if you only have like say 10 pages, maybe your web designer can help you figure out a toggle between them if that makes sense to you. Um, but again, like I would probably consult with a lawyer, but I think it would probably be okay. It just would make sure that like the first thing a screen reader would hit would be like switch to, the visually impaired, except, like some kind of language to know that they have to click a button to get to something that might be easier for them to interact with. So just a thought. Um, Thank you so much for your time today, for listening. I really appreciate questions always. Um, Again, try to use these resources. We'll share. I'll work with Alyssa to share the presentation. I'm going to share like a one pager. It's like just like all of these tips to remind you of the things you need to look at as you're building documents and web pages. And please use the other resources, especially look at the state of Vermont stuff. I think it can be helpful. There's a lot of information there, so it might take some time to slog through. And again, if you are not you're not creating documents, you're not the web manager, please share this with those in your management team or leadership that may be doing this work. Just so at least they have some visual awareness, so they're not caught off guard when somebody gets mad and writes a complaint. I mean, it's really like a risk management at this point. So, all right, Alyssa, thank you so much for having me come in. I hope this was helpful.
Definitely. We really appreciate it, Stephanie. And yeah, so we will share out the link to the recording and all the resources that Stephanie's provided. And then, yes, just to reiterate, to bring us back to the SWIP, I guess I can turn my camera back on. Your only accessibility requirement is listening to this training, at least one person per SWIMmy, and that's it. For your actual website content, we are going to be looking at the A to Z guide, for example, in great depth next April. So you have until next April before we're really going to be looking at that super closely. And just the other little things that we put in the SWIP itself, but not in terms of accessibility, just in terms of meeting the SWIP requirements. So the closest, like I said, is the A to Z guide. Like we are no longer accepting PDF A to Z guides. Now they have to be web-based, for example. I don't know, Shannon, is there anything else to add for what we're looking for? I think that's really
Yeah, I think
it.
that was mostly it. And I do just want to put a plug out there, and I can send this out in an email, is, Stephanie mentioned a web accessibility checker. I do have that available. So if any one of you would want to just set up like a 30-minute call where we can just sort of go through, pull up your pages, do that accessibility checker, I can send you a very brief like email response just to give you a sense of like the status of your websites. I think Anne wouldn't mind me offering that to you all. Like we said, we won't be checking up on this on your web pages, but I just want to make that available to you if you feel like this is a lot of information to digest and you're not even really sure where to start. That may be a good place to start.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shannon. So exactly, we really are just trying to share information and then help you where we can, because it's something we've been thinking a lot about. So please reach out if you have any future questions. Thanks again to Stephanie, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, folks.